The year was 2088. The 3I Atlas ship orbited above Earth like a silent point, almost invisible. From up there, the planet seemed calm, covered in thin clouds and vast oceans, but seen closely, the ground still carried the marks of a hard time. The air was heavy, full of dust, the smell of rain and old metal. There were green areas again, small fields where scientists and volunteers tried to make life grow once more. It was to one of these places that Arian descended. He wasn't human, though his body imitated one well. His skin was too pale, uniform, without marks. His eyes had a faint inner glow, as if reflecting something from within. His steps were calculated, precise, without haste or error. He had been trained to observe, not to feel. His mission was simple: to understand how humans survived, how they thought, how they loved. No involvement, no emotion, just data. Arian stepped onto the wet ground and looked around. The wind blew cold, and the sound of dry leaves mixed with the distant hum of insects. He had never heard that kind of sound outside of archived recordings. It was irregular but alive. The grass bent under the weight of his boots, and the smell of fresh soil rose strong, reminding him that something here was pulsing. Ahead, a woman worked alone. She was crouched, her hands inside a planting box, her hair tied back loosely, her clothes simple and worn. She cleaned the soil carefully, removing stones, adjusting small green sprouts. The low sun cast a golden outline around her body. Arian stopped and watched, not knowing why. The protocol told him to record observations, so he activated the device on his wrist and began to dictate: adult human. Continuous movement, neutral expression, manual activity related to restoration agriculture. The mechanical voice repeated what he said. The woman looked up, surprised, but not afraid. "Are you from the research center?" she asked, wiping her face with her arm. He hesitated before answering. Human speech required breath, pause, intention, things he hadn't mastered yet. He only nodded. She pointed to the sky and said, "It's going to rain." He looked up. The sky looked the same as before, gray but stable. "I see no sign of rain," he said in a calm, firm voice. She laughed, a short, light laugh. "The signs aren't in the sky. They're in the air." Then she went back to tending the plants. Arian recorded that too, without understanding. "The signs are in the air." The sentence didn't fit any report. Rain came soon after. It started as a drizzle and turned into a storm within minutes. He stood still, analyzing human behavior under sudden weather change. She, on the other hand, didn't seek shelter. She stayed there, head tilted back, eyes closed, face lifted to the falling water. Her hands opened as if accepting something. He watched every movement, as if that simple scene were a code he needed to decode. The water soaked her clothes, clinging to her body, yet she didn't move. She only smiled. "Why are you smiling?" he asked, confused. "Because if I don't smile, the cold wins first," she replied. He didn't understand. The human smile wasn't logical. It served no useful function. Yet something in that expression disturbed what he called his internal stability. The transmitter on his wrist vibrated. It was the ship requesting reports. He looked at the display but didn't respond. He didn't know what to write. The data he had felt useless. No number could explain what he had just seen. The wind grew stronger, and the rain hit harder. The sound was irregular, chaotic, yet there was harmony in it. Ilara, unaware of his gaze, kept working. With every movement, mud splashed on her arms. She looked tired, but there was steadiness in her actions. Arian took a step forward, feeling the ground sink under his weight. The water ran down his face, and he realized human skin had a different temperature. Warm, unstable, alive. She looked at him, half smiling. "You look lost," he answered. "I'm studying." "Then write this down too," she said, fixing a small sprout. "Life likes those who stay." He didn't reply. He recorded the phrase and turned off the sound. The wind calmed and the rain faded. The sunlight broke through the clouds and fell over the field. Everything shone for a moment. The droplets on the leaves reflected colors, and the air smelled of iron and wet flowers. Elara packed her tools, walked past him, and said only, "I'll be back early tomorrow." Then she disappeared among the trees. Arian stayed alone, the ground still warm, the sound of dripping water. The echo of her laugh mixed with the wind. For the first time, he didn't know what to send to the ship. No data felt enough. He pressed the transmitter, thought of speaking, but his voice failed. He only recorded one final line. "The human species smiles when it loses control." Then he turned off the device and stood there, looking at the gray horizon. The sky over Earth changed quickly, but what he felt changed faster. Something small and unknown, like a seed, had started to grow. The next day dawned gray and quiet. The ground was still damp, and the air carried the sweet smell of last night's rain. The wind blew softly, making the thin mist dance above the field. Arian walked slowly, his steps steady, watching how each drop of dew caught the early light. The landscape seemed alive, breathing. Dark soil, washed leaves, the distant cry of a lone bird. He had never heard a sound like that. So irregular, so simple. The ship's voice tried to reach him through the transmitter, but he kept the device off. The protocol demanded reports, measurements, analysis. He only wanted to see the field again. When he arrived, Elara was already there. She was facing away, crouched near the seedlings, her hair loose and still damp. She wore the same clothes as the day before, now clean but worn. Arian stood still, watching. She didn't notice him at first. Her hands moved with quiet precision, pressing the soil around the roots, and every gesture seemed to carry weight and meaning. When she turned and saw him, she didn't speak. She just nodded, like someone greeting a familiar shadow. The sun was still weak, a pale light breaking through the clouds, spreading over the wet ground. He took a few steps closer. The air was colder than the day before, but there was a warmth that didn't come from the sun. She pointed to a tray of small plants beside her and said, "You can help, if you're not just here to watch." Her tone was light, but her eyes searched his face, as if she was testing something. Arian hesitated, then knelt beside her. The earth was cold, soft between his fingers. He tried to copy her movements, pressing the soil carefully. She glanced at his hands and smiled. "Too gentle," she said. "The roots need to feel they belong." He didn't answer. He pressed harder this time. The sound of wet soil closing around the roots was faint, like a whisper. A breeze passed, carrying the smell of grass and rain. "Better," she said quietly. For a long moment, they worked without words. Only the rhythm of their breathing, the scrape of fingers against dirt, the wind moving the leaves. The world around them had no edges, just the slow motion of two people existing in the same space. He looked at her again. There was a line of mud across her cheek. He thought of wiping it away, but didn't move. His chest tightened, not with pain, but with something unfamiliar, something too close to curiosity. Elara noticed his stare. "What is it?" she asked. "You study people, don't you?" He nodded. "Then study this," she said, holding up a seed between her fingers. "It looks small, useless, right? But if it finds enough light and warmth, it breaks itself open. That's how it lives." She planted it gently and covered it with soil. "That's how everything learns to stay." Her voice faded with the wind. He watched her in silence. The data in his mind didn't match what he was seeing. None of this could be measured. Not the sound of her breath. Not the weight of the quiet between them. The transmitter blinked again on his wrist. He ignored it. The sun climbed higher, warming the field. She stood up, wiped her hands on her clothes, and looked at him. "You don't talk much, do you?" He shook his head. "That's all right," she said. "Some things don't need words." She picked up her bag and walked toward the path that led to the small shelter beyond the trees. Arian stayed there, kneeling in the dirt, surrounded by rows of fragile plants. He placed his palm on the ground where she had worked and felt the lingering warmth of her touch mixed with the cold of the earth. For a moment he wondered what it meant to belong to a place. The question stayed, even after she disappeared among the trees. The ship kept calling from above, but he didn't answer. He just sat there, listening to the slow heartbeat of the soil, trying to understand why the silence of that morning felt louder than anything he had ever heard. The days began to blend into one another. Morning light, soft wind, the slow rhythm of hands working the soil. Arian no longer counted time in rotations or data cycles. He measured it in her presence, in how often Ilara looked at him without speaking, in the small silences they shared that somehow filled more space than words. He came every day, always at the same hour. At first, he told himself it was for observation, but now he no longer sent reports. The transmitter on his wrist stayed dark. The ship would wait. The mission could wait. The field was alive again, greener each morning. Birds came back. He watched them land on the wooden posts, tilting their heads, fearless. The air was warmer now, full of that smell he could never describe. Something between water, earth, and the faint sweetness of decay. Elara said it was life reorganizing itself. He recorded the phrase in his mind, but didn't file it anywhere. He kept it like a secret. Sometimes she talked while she worked. Not about science, not about the past. Just small things. The color of the sky at dusk. The shape of clouds that looked like old maps. The memory of her father's voice calling her in for dinner when she was a child. Arian didn't understand nostalgia, but he could hear how her tone changed when she remembered. Softer. Slower. Like she was talking to the air. Not to him. Once, while they planted a new row of sprouts, she asked, "Do you ever miss your home?" He didn't answer right away. The word miss had no translation in his world. He looked at the horizon, at the fading blue above the hills, and said, "I don't know what that means." She smiled without looking up. "Then you're lucky." He wanted to ask why, but she was already humming a tune he didn't recognize. The melody lingered in the air, simple and circular, like the movement of her hands pressing the soil. He memorized it, the way he memorized everything she did. One afternoon, she cut her hand on a piece of wire. It wasn't deep, but blood appeared fast, bright against the dirt. Arian moved without thinking. He reached for her wrist, pressing lightly to stop the bleeding. The warmth of her skin pulsed beneath his fingers, quick and human. "It's fine," she whispered, but didn't pull away. The moment stretched. Her breathing slowed. His stayed steady. And for the first time he realized his heart, or what his kind called a central pulse, had changed rhythm. When she finally stepped back, her eyes held his for a long second. "You look scared," she said quietly. "I don't get scared," he replied. "Then it must be something else." She smiled, a tired, knowing smile, and wrapped her hand in cloth. The air between them felt heavier now, charged with something invisible. That night, when he looked up, the three-eye atlas glowed faintly among the stars. A voice echoed in his mind, mechanical, distant. "Return for recalibration." He closed his eyes. He didn't want to. He thought of Ilara's laugh in the rain, her voice saying the roots need to feel they belong. And for the first time, he wondered if belonging was the real experiment. The next morning, she wasn't in the field. The tools were still there, the seedlings damp from dew, but no sign of her. He waited. Hours passed. The sun climbed, then fell, and the shadows grew long. He almost left, but then saw her walking down the path, carrying a small basket. "I thought you left," she said. "I don't leave," he replied. "Maybe that's your problem," she said softly, setting the basket down. She handed him a piece of fruit, its skin rough and pale. "Eat," she said. "You'll understand." He hesitated. "It's safe," she added with a grin. "It's just sweet." He bit into it. The taste was sharp, strange, alive. The sweetness came slow, hidden under a hint of bitterness. He chewed slowly, feeling the texture, the fibers breaking apart, the juice running warm down his throat. "Well?" she asked. He didn't speak. He looked at her, and the words didn't come. The wind rustled the leaves. Somewhere, water dripped from a pipe. She laughed softly. "See? Some things you have to feel to understand." That night, Arion didn't send anything to the ship. He walked alone through the field, the moonlight painting silver lines over the wet soil. The air hummed quietly around him. Everything felt different, slower, heavier, real. For the first time since he arrived, he looked up at the stars and didn't see coordinates or distance. He saw home, and it wasn't where he came from. The order came at dusk. The voice from the Three-Eye Atlas was calm, without emotion, as all voices from above were. Immediate return required. Mission integrity compromised. Arion stood in the middle of the field, his hands still covered in soil, listening. The wind moved softly through the tall grass, bending the stems until they brushed against his legs. The message repeated once, then fell silent. He looked toward the hills, where Alara was finishing her work for the day. The sky was orange, fading to gray, the air thick with the smell of dust and roots. She noticed him watching and waved, a small movement that made something inside him tighten. He didn't wave back. When she reached him, the last light was fading. "You look like someone who heard bad news," she said. Her voice was light, but her eyes were not. He didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, heavy but not cold. "They're calling you back, aren't they?" she asked. He nodded. She didn't act surprised. "I knew it would happen," she whispered. "Things that don't belong here never stay long." She crouched beside a row of young plants and began to cover their roots with fresh soil. "You should go before they come for you." Arion knelt beside her. The smell of wet earth mixed with the warmth of her skin. "If I go," he said slowly, "I forget this." She stopped, looked up. "Forget what?" "All of it. You, this place, the sound of rain." He paused. "They'll take it from me. They call it recalibration." She shook her head and let out a quiet breath that sounded like a laugh, but wasn't. "You talk like feelings are just data." "They are," he said, "but lately, I don't want them to be." Alara's hands trembled slightly as she pushed the soil down. "Then don't go." Her voice was soft, almost lost in the wind. He stared at her, searching her face for a reason, for permission. None came, only the faint reflection of starlight in her eyes. The communicator on his wrist pulsed blue. A warning tone echoed, sharp, sterile, impatient. The field filled with light for a second, the shadow of the ship crossing the clouds above. He looked up, then back at her. She was standing now, hair moving with the breeze, face half in shadow. "If you leave now," she said quietly, "you'll stop feeling this pain. But you'll never feel anything again." The words sank into him like rain into dry soil. He took the communicator off and placed it on the ground. The light blinked faster, flashing blue on the wet leaves. The voice came again, louder now. "Arion, confirm departure." He didn't move. Alara took a step closer. The night air pressed between them, cold and electric. He reached out, unsure what to do with his hands, and she placed hers over his. Her palm was warm, small, real. "They'll come for you," she said. "I know. Then what will you do?" He looked at her hand, then at the sky. "Maybe nothing. Maybe I'll just stay until they stop looking." She smiled faintly, though her eyes shone with tears that didn't fall. "That's a dangerous choice." "I've studied danger," he said, almost smiling back. It never looked like this. Above them, a low hum grew louder. The clouds pulsed with light. He stood still, his hand still in hers. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "They said love is a variable, unstable, unreliable." She looked up at him. "Maybe that's why it's worth keeping." The light above flared once, blinding white, then vanished. The sky went dark again. Only the sound of insects returned, cautious and small. Arion looked down at the communicator. The blue light was gone. He didn't know if the signal had been cut or ignored. It didn't matter. He let out a long breath, like someone learning how to exhale for the first time. Alara stepped closer and rested her head against his chest. He froze, afraid to move. Her hair smelled of rain and smoke. The steady rhythm beneath his ribs wasn't mechanical anymore. It was uneven, human. The night deepened around them, full of sound. The whisper of the wind, the pulse of water underground, the quiet hum of something alive choosing to stay. The ship never came. Days passed, then weeks. The sky remained empty, quiet, as if the Three-Eye Atlas had erased his existence. Arian stayed in the valley with Ilara. They worked side by side, planting, fixing, waiting. The earth grew softer beneath their hands. The plants rose, fragile but certain. The air was warm in the mornings and cold at night. He didn't need the communicator anymore. It lay buried under the roots of an olive tree, its blue light fading until it disappeared completely. Sometimes he still looked up at the stars, wondering which one was his home. But the thought no longer hurt. It was just distance now. Ilara spoke less as time went on. They didn't need words. Their routine had its own language. The sound of water filling the irrigation lines, the scrape of metal against stone, the quiet sigh of the wind between their shoulders. When she smiled, it was a small thing, like sunlight caught in glass, and he felt it. Not as a thought, but as warmth spreading through him. One morning, she woke before him. The horizon was silver, and fog covered the ground. She walked toward the trees, touching the leaves as she passed, her fingers tracing the moisture that clung to them. Arian followed, keeping a few steps behind. The mist made her figure blur, as if she were dissolving into the air. "It's strange," she said softly. "Sometimes I dream that the world is watching us, that every seed we plant is a memory someone else will find." He didn't answer. He only listened. The sound of her voice was enough. When she turned, her face was calm, her eyes distant. "If they find you again, what will you do?" "I won't run," he said. "Running would mean forgetting." She smiled faintly. "Then promise me you'll remember, even if I'm gone." He stepped closer. "You won't be gone." "Everything goes, Arian," she whispered. "That's what makes it beautiful." He didn't know how to reply. The words stayed caught between his chest and throat. She reached out and placed her hand over his heart, feeling the pulse that had once been too even, too artificial. Now it trembled beneath her fingers. "See?" she said. "You learned." He took her hand and held it there, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The sun began to rise, slow and pale. Its light spread through the fog, painting the world gold. She leaned against him, and for a long moment they stood without moving. The field glowed softly around them, leaves wet with light, soil breathing steam. Above, the sky cleared. No signals, no orders, only silence, deep and human. Later, when she walked ahead of him down the path, her figure shrinking with each step, he stayed behind, watching. She didn't turn. The breeze lifted her hair, and for a second she looked like part of the light itself. He waited until she disappeared among the trees. Then he knelt, pressed his hand into the soil, and whispered something no one would record. The earth was cool, alive beneath his palm. A single green shoot broke the surface beside him. He smiled, a real smile, small and quiet, and stayed there until the stars returned. That night, the valley was still. The wind had stopped. The air smelled of grass and memory. Far above, the Three-Eye Atlas circled the planet in silence, its sensors blind to the one heart that had chosen to remain below.